The Odyssey drifted through the dark silence of space, its hull gleaming under the dim light of distant stars. Captain Ethan Reyes stood at the observation window of the bridge, watching as Earth shrank into a pale blue dot behind them. A new age was dawning for humanity. The crew of the Odyssey was tasked with the most ambitious mission Earth had ever undertaken, deep space exploration. But what they didn't expect was the mysterious transmission they had just intercepted. At first, it had been nothing more than static, a garbled mess of frequencies they'd assumed was just another anomaly, another echo from a distant star system. But as the weeks wore on, the signals began to form patterns, strange, purposeful structures that no natural phenomenon could explain. And then the first message came through. Warning: the Deathworlders must not be allowed to spread. Your kind is more dangerous than you realize. The words sent a ripple through the crew. Reyes, a battle-hardened officer who'd survived more than his share of space skirmishes, was the first to admit it. He was unnerved. The message had come from somewhere beyond the known limits of the galaxy, beyond the areas mapped by humanity's most ambitious probes. He immediately ordered a full investigation. The science officers worked day and night to decode the transmission, revealing more layers of cryptic warnings about human aggression, survival instincts, and something called the Zarketh, a name no one had ever heard before. But the final line was the most chilling. We are watching. Your species is on the verge of becoming a threat to us all. Reyes called an emergency meeting. The officers of the Odyssey, along with the communications specialists and Dr. Rebecca Kim, the ship's chief scientist, gathered in the conference room, the atmosphere tense. This message is directed at us. Specifically, Dr. Kim said, her voice tight with concern. And I don't think it's just a warning. It feels like a threat. Whoever they are, they think we're dangerous. Reyes crossed his arms. And why would they think that? Kim glanced at the others before responding. Maybe because we are. From their perspective, we might just be a ticking time bomb in the universe. Reyes's brow furrowed. The weight of her words settled in the room, suffocating the air. Humanity had always prided itself on its survival instincts, its tenacity to adapt, to thrive. But in the vast, unknown stretches of space, it seemed that might make them the most terrifying species of all. Captain Ethan Reyes stood at the helm of the Odyssey as the ship glided through the darkness, heading toward the coordinates that had been embedded in the Zarketh transmission. The crew had worked tirelessly to decipher the alien message, and the implications were clear. Whether they were ready or not, humanity was about to meet an alien civilization that already knew more about them than they did about it. And from the looks of it, the Zarketh were not eager to make their acquaintance. The air on the bridge felt thick with anticipation as Reyes surveyed the stars on the view screen, the black expanse broken only by the occasional speck of light. The Zarketh's homeworld was located in a distant sector, far outside Earth's most extensive reach. Reyes was not a man given to superstition, but as he adjusted the ship's trajectory, a knowing sense of unease crept over him. They were venturing into the unknown with a species that had already judged humanity from a distance. "We'll be arriving in the Zarketh system in 6 hours, Captain," reported Lieutenant Maria Hayes, her voice steady but laced with a touch of nervousness. Reyes nodded, but before he could respond, the voice of Dr. Rebecca Kim crackled over the comms. "Ethan, you might want to take a look at this." He stepped into the small lab where Dr. Kim and her team had been working non-stop since the message had first been received. The room was dimly lit, the walls lined with blinking monitors. Kim gestured to the central console, where a map of the Zarketh system was displayed, showing a series of impossibly advanced fleets stationed in orbit around their home planet. It's their military network. I've been running the analysis on the transmission, she explained, her fingers flying over the controls. These are highly organized, militarized species. The Jarketh don't just have advanced technology, they have domination down to an art. This is no peaceful race. Ray's leaned in, his mind racing. So they're not just cautious. They're afraid. Afraid and hostile, Kim confirmed. And whatever they know about us has them thinking that humanity's first contact with them could be the spark that ignites a war. The thought hit Reyes like a punch to the gut. The Jarketh had been watching Earth from the shadows, analysing humanity's brutal history of survival, and now they had come to the conclusion that humans might be the greatest threat in the galaxy. As the Odyssey neared the Jarketh homeworld, Reyes's mind swirled with questions. What had they seen? What had Earth done to provoke such fear? But there was no time for answers now. The first steps toward an uncertain future were about to be taken, and Reyes knew they might not be the first to strike, but humanity's reaction would define the future of galactic diplomacy. We're going in, Reyes muttered under his breath, the words almost a prayer. The Odyssey dropped out of warp space and entered the Jarketh system. The planet itself was an awe-inspiring sight. Vast oceans of shimmering blue, sprawling cities suspended above a fertile green landscape. But the beauty was marred by the heaviness of the situation. All around the ship, a network of Jarketh warships flanked the Odyssey, their sleek hulls gleaming like predators circling their prey. "Captain, we've been cleared to land," Lieutenant Hayes announced, her voice tight with a mix of professionalism and the weight of the unknown. Reyes's gaze hardened as he stood up from his chair. There was an unspoken tension between the crew and the Jarketh fleet, a silence that spoke volumes. This was no ordinary diplomatic mission. Earth's first contact with an alien race had just become a high-stakes game of survival. The Odyssey was guided down toward the Jarketh capital, a sprawling metropolis of glimmering towers and intricate, organic structures. As the ship descended through the atmosphere, Reyes could feel the weight of the eyes upon them. Thousands of Jarketh citizens must have been watching from the surface, their eyes wide with curiosity and caution. The landing pad was a perfect circle, surrounded by tall, luminescent trees that seemed to pulse with an eerie light. A delegation of Jarketh awaited them. High Consul Talora, tall and imposing with a crown of bioluminescent tendrils framing her face, stepped forward to greet them. Her expression was inscrutable, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed her distrust. "Welcome to our world, Earthlings," Talora said, her voice smooth but cold. "We hoped it would never come to this." Reyes stepped forward, offering a respectful bow. "We didn't come here to start a war. We've been trying to understand your message, to make sure there are no misunderstandings." Talora regarded him silently, then gestured toward the vast city around them. "You should have listened when we first warned you," she said, her tone colder than the surrounding winds. "You, who call yourselves humans, survivors of a death world, don't understand what true power is. We do, and we are not here to be your allies. You are a dangerous species, and we've watched you closely. All your wars, your bloodshed. You think you can simply step into the galactic community like nothing has happened." Before Reyes could respond, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. A flashing red light appeared on every Jarketh ship in orbit, signaling an immediate emergency. Dolores' face hardened. "The Kragmar are coming," she said, voice tense. "And I fear, Earthlings, that you've arrived at a most unfortunate time." Reyes froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The Kragmar, an ancient enemy, as the transmission had warned, were already here. And the real reason for this meeting was about to reveal itself, not diplomacy, but survival. The ground shook again, more violently this time. Reyes instinctively reached for the nearest support as a warning siren blared throughout the Jarketh capital. Tulora's face, usually composed, now showed the first cracks of true concern. She turned to her aides, barking orders in their native language. Reyes, his mind racing, grasped the magnitude of what had just been said. The Kragmar, the name sent chills down his spine. The Jarketh had mentioned them in passing, but the gravity of the situation was becoming all too clear. These were not just enemies, they were a species capable of tearing through galactic empires. Captain Reyes, Tulora said, her voice sharp and filled with urgency. I regret that I must ask for your immediate help. The Kragmar have launched a surprise offensive, an assault on our outer colonies. We cannot fight them alone. Reyes exchanged a glance with Major John Blake, the leader of the human contingent on board the Odyssey. Blake was a soldier through and through, his battle-hardened face betraying no emotion, but Reyes could see the tension in his posture. This was not the kind of war they were prepared for. Request accepted, High Consul, Reyes replied. What's the situation? Terrible. Tulora answered bluntly. The Kragmar have developed a new class of war machines, biomechanical monstrosities capable of withstanding anything our ships can throw at them. We can't stop them with conventional weapons. We need your human ingenuity. Reyes's mind whirred. The Jarketh had always been known for their technological superiority, their precision, their order. But what could humanity bring to the table in this kind of conflict? Blake spoke up, his voice calm but confident. We fight dirty, High Consul. We use tactics that no one expects. Guerrilla warfare, misdirection, sabotage. You've got the firepower, but we have the will to win against impossible odds. Tulora's gaze shifted between Blake and Reyes, assessing. You will join us on the front lines. If your forces are as resourceful as you claim, then perhaps you are more useful than we thought. The command center was a frenzy of activity as the first Kragmar wave broke through the Jarketh outer defenses. Humanity had come not as saviors, but as unlikely partners, fighters who had learned to adapt to Deathworlds to survive. The Odyssey's crew, now standing alongside the Jarketh, prepared for the worst. The war had already begun, and Earth's involvement was no longer just a diplomatic matter. It was a fight for survival. As the human ships deployed, Reyes turned to Blake. We're in this together now. There's no turning back. Blake gave a curt nod. I wouldn't have it any other way. The war had come, swift and brutal. The first full-scale battle between the Jarketh and the Kragmar unfolded just beyond the orbit of their second moon, a barren world now stained with the smoke and fire of interstellar conflict. The human forces, alongside the Jarketh, had established a forward base, a sprawling military encampment on the planet's surface. It was here that humanity's unorthodox tactics would be put to the test. Major John Blake stood in the middle of a hastily constructed command center, watching as the first reports of Kragmar engagements came in. The ground beneath his boots vibrated with distant explosions. Above, in the sky, the silhouettes of Jarketh warships engaged Kragmar battlecruisers in a deadly game of cat and mouse. But the true nightmare was still to come. The Kragmar's new biomechanical war machines, towering behemoths, had proven impervious to Jarketh firepower. Blake turned toward the strategic map, where his team of human officers had already begun to devise a strategy of counterattack. These Kragmar, they're like nothing we fought before, Blake muttered to Lieutenant Sarah Monroe, his second in command. The Kragmar war machines were a grotesque fusion of organic matter and mechanized strength, gigantic, heavily armored, and capable of overwhelming anything in their path. Monroe, ever calm under pressure, shook her head. It's not about brute force, it's about strategy. We've got the numbers, and more importantly, we've got the element of surprise. Reyes, standing across the room, listened intently. The Odyssey had suffered minimal damage so far, but the human fleet was being called upon to deploy advanced fighter squadrons for quick strikes and guerrilla-style raids, exactly what Blake and Monroe had trained them for. Blake's strategy was simple: hit fast, hit hard, and hit where the Kragmar least expected. While the Jarketh focused their attacks on the larger Kragmar ships, Blake and his unit would infiltrate the Kragmar's ranks and disable their machines. The Kragmar war machines were powerful, but they relied on a network of bioenergy. If they could sever that connection, if they could find their weak points, human ingenuity could turn the tide. To Laura, still observing with a wariness she couldn't fully conceal, approached them. "Are you certain this will work?" she asked, her voice tight. "We'll find out soon enough," Blake replied, his gaze never leaving the map. With that, they deployed, Jarketh warships and human fighters blending into a chaotic dance of destruction. Blake's squadron was the first to hit the ground, parachuting onto the war-torn plains, where the Kragmar's enormous war machines had begun to march across the battlefield, their massive legs shaking the earth with each step. Blake's heart raced. This was no longer just about winning a war. This was about proving that humanity, its survival instincts, its unrelenting adaptability, could make all the difference in the universe. The first strike hit harder than anyone had expected. Major John Blake's squadron had made it behind enemy lines, threading through the dense forests of the Kragmar-controlled region, where the giant biomechanical war machines loomed like nightmares on legs. The Odyssey's fighter pilots had provided cover, but it was the ground troops, led by Blake, who were about to do the unthinkable: get close enough to the Kragmar war machines to disable them. Blake crouched low in the underbrush, his team spread out around him. The Kragmar machines moved methodically, their thick, organic armour barely reflecting the scattered gunfire from the Jarketh ships above. They had learned to ignore conventional weapons. Nothing short of a direct hit from a capital ship's plasma cannons seemed to even scratch their hide. "That's the weak spot," Monroe whispered into Blake's comm, as she pointed to a glowing node on the back of one of the Kragmar Titans. "Bioenergy conduit. Hit that, and we can take it down." Blake nodded, scanning the area. The creatures were slow, lumbering giants, but their senses were sharp. They could detect even the faintest disturbance in the air, a flicker of movement on the ground. If they were spotted, it would be over. He signaled for his team to move forward. Each member of his squadron, armed with specialized EMP charges and explosives, was tasked with planting them in the bioenergy conduits of the Kragmar war machines. It was risky. Blowing their cover would mean certain death, but it was their best shot. The Kragmar didn't anticipate human ingenuity, and that was humanity's advantage. As Blake approached the first Titan, the ground beneath him trembled. He froze. The Kragmar machine had halted, its head swiveling toward his position. Its glowing eyes locked onto his, an eerie, otherworldly hum emanating from its armoured body. "Blake!" Monroe's voice crackled in his ear, a warning in her tone. "You're too exposed. Fall back." But it was too late. With a low growl of mechanical and organic fusion, the Kragmar machine's massive claw swung down in a vicious arc. Blake dove to the side, narrowly avoiding it, but his heart pounded as he saw the other soldiers racing toward the weak spot on the machine's side. "Now!" Blake shouted. The EMP devices detonated with a high-pitched whine, followed by a crackling surge of electricity. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the Titan's body twitched violently. Its massive form staggered and collapsed to the ground with a terrifying roar, its bioenergy conduits severed. A ripple of shock ran through the remaining Kragmar machines, their movements suddenly erratic as they struggled to maintain function. "This is it," Blake muttered. "The tide's turning." He looked up to see the Zarketh warships diving in, their plasma weapons flaring as they took advantage of the Kragmar's temporary disarray. The human strike had worked. The Kragmar's new war machines, once seen as unbeatable, were now vulnerable. But Blake knew this victory was only the beginning. The war was far from over. The Kragmar weren't going to give up that easily. The aftermath of the battle was nothing short of miraculous. The Kragmar's biomechanical war machines, once thought invulnerable, lay in heaps across the charred plains of Zarketh territory. The crippling blow dealt by Blake's squadron had shifted the balance, and the Zarketh, who had been caught off guard by humanity's unconventional tactics, had rallied to take full advantage. The tide of the war had finally turned, but it came at a cost. Casualties had been high on both sides, and the scars of the battle were evident. In the days following the victory, President Olivia Carter sat in a secure communications room aboard the Odyssey, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy that flickered before her. The Zarketh had made a dramatic reversal, but the Kragmar threat wasn't eradicated. Not yet. And their confidence in humanity, still tentative, remained frail. Captain Reyes and Major Blake stood by her side as the latest intelligence reports came in. Blake was still wearing the grime of the battlefield on his uniform, his face smeared with dust, but his eyes were sharp. Reyes, too, was tense. There was no real time to rest. The Kragmar had retreated, but only to regroup, and the question on everyone's mind was whether this fragile alliance could withstand another wave of Kragmar fury. "Do you think we can hold them off again?" President Carter asked, her tone quieter than usual, weighed down by the enormity of the situation. "We've given them a bloody nose, but the Kragmar won't be so easy to stop next time," Blake replied. "But we've learned a lot. We've got the advantage now, at least until they adapt. Our next move has to count." To Laura, who had joined them through a secured line, appeared on the holoscreen. Her expression was as impassive as always, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of grudging respect, perhaps. "We will hold the line," she said, her voice steady but tinged with an edge of uncertainty. "But your species, Major Blake, you have earned a place among us. Your warriors are fierce, your tactics unpredictable. You've shown us that we have much to learn." Blake stood straighter at her words, though he knew that trust between species was still an uneasy thing. The Zarketh had always prided themselves on order, on precision. The idea of relying on humanity's chaotic, unpredictable nature had clearly unsettled them, but now they had no choice. "I don't think you're going to be rid of us any time soon," Blake said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Not if this war's going to end." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them all. The alliance between Earth and the Zarketh, fragile and tense as it was, had become humanity's greatest hope. But Blake knew that this tentative peace was on a razor's edge. The Kragmar had not been defeated, they had only been delayed. As the Odyssey prepared to head deeper into Kragmar-controlled space, Reyes looked out the window, eyes scanning the vast, starlit void. They were standing at the crossroads of an uncertain future, humanity's future among the stars. And every step forward would be a dangerous gamble. But there was one thing he knew for sure. The Zarketh may have feared humanity once, but now They were depending on them. The Odyssey cut through the cold blackness of space, its engines humming softly as it approached the fringes of Kragmar space. The distant stars shone through the windows like pinpricks of light in an otherwise impenetrable void. Inside the ship, the crew was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts as the weight of the mission ahead pressed down on them. Captain Ethan Reyes stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the holographic display of the Kragmar sector. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Intelligence had shown that the Kragmar were massing an even greater force, one that could potentially overwhelm the fragile alliance between humanity and the Jarketh. The stakes had never been higher. "Captain," Lieutenant Hayes said, her voice breaking the silence, "we've got a transmission from Jarketh Command." Reyes turned toward the comms station. The transmission had been encrypted, but it was clearly urgent. After a few tense moments, the image of High Consul Delora appeared on the screen, her regal face as stoic as ever. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something more human, more vulnerable. "Captain Reyes," she began, her tone grave, "the Kragmar have initiated their final offensive. They are targeting the heart of Jarketh space. If we fall, the galaxy will be theirs for the taking. We need you to lead a final counterattack." Reyes clenched his fists, feeling the pressure of the moment. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about shaping the future, about proving that humanity had a place in the galactic order, that they could stand shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful species in the universe. "We're ready," Reyes said, his voice steady. "Just tell us where to go." Delora nodded, her expression softened by a ray of gesture of trust. "We will coordinate our fleets. But know this, Captain, this battle will not be won by firepower alone. You must go behind enemy lines. We need you to find the Kragmar's command ship. It's heavily protected, but if we can disable their leadership, we can fracture their forces." Reyes glanced at Major Blake, who stood at his side, a grim determination etched across his features. "Understood," Blake said quietly. "We'll do whatever it takes." Reyes nodded, his heart heavy with the responsibility. The crew of the Odyssey had come a long way, humans, Jarketh, allies forged in the crucible of war. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future where their species could thrive together or perish apart. As the Odyssey prepared to launch into the heart of enemy territory, Reyes couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was watching, waiting to see if humanity would rise to the challenge. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their firepower or their cunning, but in their ability to adapt, to survive, and to stand against the darkness no matter what. As the ship jumped into hyperspace, Reyes looked out into the vast expanse, his mind set on the battle ahead. Whatever the future held, humanity had proven one thing. They were no longer a species to be underestimated. The war was not over, but the Jarketh and the Kragmar had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity's will to fight, and that would be their downfall.